It all began in a small village, a place tucked away in the mountains of Bavaria, Germany. The village was called Bergen. This is where Christian Karl Gerhartsreiter was born. He grew up in a simple home. His father was a painter. His mother was a seamstress. They were ordinary people. But Christian, he was not an ordinary boy. He had dreams, big dreams, dreams that were much larger than his small German town. He looked across the ocean, toward America. He saw a land of opportunity, a place where a person could become anyone they wanted to be, a place where a boy from a Bavarian village could completely change who he was. He was a clever boy. Everyone in Bergen knew that. He learned English by listening to the radio. He studied American culture from afar. He felt a pull toward the United States, a powerful, undeniable pull. It was more than just a dream, it was an obsession. He felt stuck in his small town. He longed for something more, something grander. He told people he was going to America. He said he would become someone important. No one really believed him. How could a boy with so little make such a big splash in a world so far away? But Christian was determined. He had a will that was as strong as iron. He was already planning his escape. The America he imagined was a place from the movies. It was a land of wealth, power, and glamour. He didn't just want to live there. He wanted to conquer it. He wanted to get into its highest circles. He wanted the respect and admiration that came with a famous name. He knew his own name, Gerhartsreiter, would not open any doors. It was too long, too German, too common. He needed a new identity, a key that could unlock the life he craved. He believed that in America, who you were was not something you were born with. It was something you could create, something you could build piece by piece, lie by lie. And so the plan took shape in his young mind. It was a daring plan, a risky plan. But for Christian, there was no other choice. He would leave Germany behind. He would leave his family. He would leave his old self in that sleepy village. He would travel to the land of dreams, and there, he would start a new life. He would become someone else, someone better, someone powerful. The world had no idea what was coming. The boy from Bergen was about to begin one of the most daring and shocking tricks of modern times. The stage was being set. The actor was ready for his first show. In 1978, the time finally came. Christian Gerhartsreiter was just a teenager. He was 17 years old. He arrived in America as a foreign exchange student. He first landed in Connecticut. He lived with a family there, the Savio family. They took him in. They tried to give him a home, but Christian had other plans. He was not there to study. He was there to change himself. He quickly convinced the family to let him move to California. He told them he had relatives there. It was a lie, of course, one of his very first lies on American soil, the first of many. It was the start of his long and tangled journey into a world of make-believe. Once in California, he needed a new identity. He needed to stay in the country. He found a young woman and married her. Her name was Amy Gersild. It was a marriage of convenience. He needed a green card. She agreed to help him. The marriage was a fake. It lasted only a day. But it served its purpose. He was now a legal resident. He was free to move about the country. He was free to begin his grand trick. He quickly left Amy behind. He moved on. He was like a ghost. He never stayed in one place for too long. He was already shedding his old skin. Christian Gerhartsreiter was beginning to disappear. He started small. He began trying on new names, like a person trying on new clothes. He called himself Christopher Gerhardt. It was simpler, more American sounding. He signed up for college classes. He went to the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. Then he went to the University of Southern California Film School. He told people he was from a wealthy German family. He hinted at noble blood. He was testing his abilities. He was getting better at his skill, the skill of lying. He learned how to be charming. He learned how to be convincing. He was a quick learner. People seemed to believe him. They rarely questioned his stories. This was a very important time for him. He was learning how to trick people. He was discovering the power of a well-told story. He found that people wanted to believe in something amazing. They wanted to believe they were with someone special. He gave them what they wanted. He was a chameleon. He could change his personality to fit any situation. He could be whoever he needed to be to get what he wanted. The shy German boy was gone. In his place was a confident, mysterious young man, a man with a secret, a man who was just getting started on his path of lying. His journey took him to San Marino, California, a wealthy, fancy area. It was the perfect place for a con man on the rise. Here, he needed a more impressive identity. Christopher Gerhardt was not enough. He needed something with more style. He decided to become Christopher Crow. He told people he was a television and film producer. He even claimed to be the nephew of the famous director Cameron Crowe. It was a bold lie. But in a town built on dreams and connections, it worked. He was a master of social engineering. He knew just what to say. He knew how to drop the right names. He lived in a guest house on a large estate. The estate belonged to a woman named Didi Sohus. He charmed his way into her life. He became a renter, but he acted like he owned the place. He drove a fancy car that belonged to Didi's son John. He threw parties. He invited important people. He made it seem like he was successful. He talked about his big projects. He discussed deals that were always just about to happen. He was always on the edge of greatness. He was so convincing, so confident. People in the wealthy community of San Marino started to believe him. Christopher Crowe, the up-and-coming producer, was a man to watch. His methods were simple but effective. He would learn just enough about a topic to sound like an expert. He could talk about art, money, or film with incredible authority. He was a great listener. He would soak up details about people's lives. Then he would use those details to build connections, to create a feeling of closeness. He made people feel important. He made them feel like they were part of his special world. He never asked for large sums of money directly. Instead, he lived off the kindness of others. He borrowed cars, he stayed in guest houses, he let people pay for his expensive dinners. It was a brilliant, parasitic life. But then, something strange happened. In 1985, John and Linda Sohus, the owners of the guest house where he lived, vanished. They disappeared without a trace. Christopher Crowe was questioned by the police. He was calm, he was collected. He told them the couple had left for a secret job in Europe. His story was weak, but with no bodies and no other clues, the police had nothing to hold him on. Shortly after the disappearance, Crowe himself vanished. He packed his bags and left San Marino. He knew the questions would not stop. It was time for a new identity, a new life. The mystery of the missing couple would last for years. After leaving California, a new person appeared from the shadows. Christian Gerhartsreiter now called himself Christopher Chichester. He moved to Greenwich, Connecticut, another wealthy town, another perfect hunting ground. This time, he was not a Hollywood producer, he was an English aristocrat, Sir Christopher Chichester. He claimed to be a baronet, the 13th in a long line of noblemen. He spoke with a perfect British accent. He dressed in tweed jackets and fine suits. He told tales of his family's castle in England. He was sophisticated. He was charming. He was completely believable. He was the perfect English gentleman. He quickly became part of the high society of Greenwich. He worked for a local television station. He hosted a show about classic films. He also worked for a stock firm. He used his supposed connections to impress his co-workers and clients. He talked about his family's huge fortune. He hinted at his ties to the royal family. People were fascinated. Who wouldn't want to be friends with a real-life English lord? He was invited to the best parties. He ate at the finest restaurants. He lived a life of luxury, all paid for by his elaborate lies and the trust of the people he fooled. He was very careful in his performance. He studied British culture and history. He learned the small details of upper-class manners. He never stopped acting, not for a moment. He was Sir Christopher Chichester 24 hours a day. He even managed to sell a pickup truck that belonged to the missing John Sohus. He faked the signature. He took the cash. It was a risky move. A clue left behind. But at the time, no one connected the charming English lord in Connecticut to the missing couple in California. He was a ghost, moving from one life to the next, leaving a trail of confusion behind him. But even this grand identity had an end date. The FBI started looking into the disappearance of John and Linda Sohus again. They began to connect the pieces. They learned that a man named Christopher Crowe had lived on their property. They traced him to Greenwich. They discovered he was now calling himself Christopher Chichester. They wanted to question him. Gerhartsreiter sensed the danger. He knew the investigators were getting close. His English persona was about to be exposed. So, he did what he always did. He vanished. Sir Christopher Chichester disappeared as suddenly as he had arrived. It was time to create his masterpiece. The next change was his most daring, his most brilliant, his most famous. Christian Gerhartsreiter decided to become a Rockefeller. Not just any Rockefeller. He chose the name Clark Rockefeller, a name that sounded real, a name that showed old money and immense power. He moved to New York City, the perfect stage for his grandest performance. He completely changed who he was. He dropped the British accent. He acted like a quiet, strange member of America's most famous rich family. He was no longer a charming socialite. He was a quiet, smart mystery, the kind of man who didn't need to impress anyone. He claimed he was a physicist, a mathematician, a man who worked on secret government projects. He said he was a freelance central banker. He spoke many languages. He collected modern art. His stories were vague but impressive. He never talked much about his family. He would say things like, "We don't talk about the other Rockefellers." This only made him seem more mysterious. It made his claims seem more real. Why would a real Rockefeller need to brag? His quiet confidence was his greatest weapon. He understood that with a name like Rockefeller, less was more. The name itself did all the work. He built his new life with great care. He joined fancy clubs, the Lotto's Club, the Knickerbocker Club. He used his supposed name to open doors that had been closed to him before. He created an air of being very smart. He would have long, rambling talks about theoretical physics and international money matters. Most people didn't understand what he was talking about, but they were too scared to question a Rockefeller. He took advantage of what they assumed, their feelings of not being good enough. He knew that people are often too polite, or too afraid of looking foolish, to challenge someone who seems powerful. His entire life was a carefully built lie. He had no fortune, he had no family connections, he was not a physicist, he was a complete fake. But his performance was so convincing that he fooled everyone. He fooled friends, he fooled business partners, he even fooled a brilliant, Harvard-educated woman into marrying him. He had reached the top of his trickery career. He was living a life that the boy from Bergen, Germany could only have dreamed of. He was Clark Rockefeller, a man of immense wealth and importance, and it was all built on a foundation of lies. As Clark Rockefeller, he married a woman named Sandra Boss. She was incredibly smart, a graduate of Stanford and Harvard Business School, a high-earning partner at the important consulting firm McKinsey & Company. She was honestly the perfect partner for his scam. She had the money. He had the name. Together, they made a powerful couple. They lived in a world of privilege. They bought a beautiful apartment on Beacon Hill in Boston. They owned a country estate in New Hampshire. They moved in the highest circles of society. No one suspected that the man Sandra Boss had married was a fake. Their life together was strange. Clark was controlling. He managed all their money. Sandra's entire salary went into accounts that he alone controlled. He kept her away from her friends and family. He was paranoid. He insisted on using payphones. He refused to have a driver's license or a social security number. He explained these odd behaviors as the quirks of the super rich. He said he was protecting their privacy, protecting them from the dangers that came with the Rockefeller name. Sandra, a brilliant woman, believed him. She was caught in his web of lies. She was living with a complete stranger. They had a daughter. They named her Ray, but Clark called her Snooks. He loved her very much. He was, by all accounts, a loving father, but his paranoia and control only grew. He homeschooled the child. He limited her contact with the outside world. He was creating a bubble for his family, a bubble that he could control completely, a bubble where his lies could not be seen through. He was living the life he had always wanted. He had a famous name, a wealthy wife, and a beautiful daughter. He was the king of his own small, made-up kingdom. But for all his careful planning, he could not control everything. His marriage to Sandra began to fall apart. His behavior became more and more strange. His lies became harder to keep up. Sandra grew tired of his controlling nature. She grew tired of being isolated. She started asking questions. She hired a private investigator. She wanted a divorce. For Clark Rockefeller, this was a disaster. A divorce meant a close look at his life. It meant lawyers and financial records. It meant his carefully built world was about to come crashing down around him. The end was near. The divorce process was the beginning of the end for Clark Rockefeller. Sandra Boss's lawyers began digging into his past. They needed financial records. They needed proof of who he was. Clark could provide neither. He had no birth certificate, no passport, no social security number. He had no real past. He gave them excuse after excuse. He claimed his records were lost or sealed. He tried to use his name to scare them. But the legal system was not like a fancy party. It demanded proof. And Clark Rockefeller had none. Sandra herself started to see the flaws in his act. She realized how little she actually knew about her own husband. He had always been secretive about his past. He claimed he was an orphan. He said his parents had died in a car crash, but the stories were always vague. They changed over time. She began to suspect that everything he had ever told her was a lie. The man she had loved, the man she had married, the father of her child, was a complete mystery. The fear and confusion must have been overwhelming. Who was this man living in her house? The private investigator Sandra hired started to find things that didn't match up. He couldn't find any record of a Clark Rockefeller with the background her husband claimed. The real Rockefeller family had no idea who he was. The name was a ghost. The entire identity was made up. As more and more evidence piled up, Sandra's lawyers became more aggressive. They demanded a full account of his life. They wanted to know where he came from. They wanted to know who he really was. The pressure was building. The man who had lived a life of lies for 30 years was finally being trapped. He tried to fight back. He hired his own lawyers. He continued to insist he was a Rockefeller. He threatened to use his family's power to crush them. But it was all a bluff. He had no power. He had no influence. He was an empty suit. The divorce was finalized. Sandra won full custody of their daughter Ray. Clark was allowed supervised visits, but for a man who had built his entire world around control, this was unacceptable. He had lost his wife. He had lost his money. Now he was losing his daughter. He was desperate, and a desperate man is a dangerous man. On July 27, 2008, the story took a dark and terrifying turn. It was a Sunday, a day for a supervised visit. Clark Rockefeller was supposed to meet his daughter, Ray, on a street in Boston's Back Bay. The social worker was there. Sandra Boss was not. As the 7-year-old girl ran to greet her father, he and another person quickly acted. They pushed the social worker to the ground. They grabbed the little girl. They forced her into a waiting car and sped away. The carefully made-up image of the strange intellectual was gone. In its place was a violent kidnapper. The kidnapping started a huge search. The FBI was called in right away. The story was everywhere. The kidnapping of a Rockefeller's daughter was big news. The irony was strong. The very name he had used to build his life of lies was now the reason the whole world was looking for him. The police released his picture. They asked the public for help. They had no idea who they were really looking for. They were hunting for Clark Rockefeller, a ghost. They didn't know his real name. They didn't know his real history. They were chasing a phantom. The investigation moved very fast. The FBI was relentless. They followed every clue. They tracked his movements. They found out he had hired a car service to drive him and his daughter to New York City. From there, he had taken a taxi. He was trying to disappear again, but this time was different. He had a child with him, and the full power of federal law enforcement was coming down on him. There was nowhere to run. There was nowhere to hide. The net was closing in around him. His decades-long escape from the law was about to come to a dramatic end. Just 6 days after the kidnapping, the FBI found him. They tracked him to a small apartment in Baltimore, Maryland. He had bought a catamaran and was planning to sail away. He had changed his appearance. He had a new name ready. He was trying to change who he was one last time. But it was too late. FBI agents burst into the apartment. They found him there. They found little Ray, safe and unharmed. The man they arrested was Clark Rockefeller, but the biggest question remained. Who was he, really? The search was over. But the mystery was just beginning. With his capture, the final revealing began. The FBI checked his fingerprints. The results were shocking. The man who called himself Clark Rockefeller was not a Rockefeller at all. His name was Christian Karl Gerhartsreiter, a German citizen, a man who had been living a lie for 3 decades. The news sent shockwaves through the rich circles he had gotten into. The friends who had admired him, the wife who had loved him, the partners who had trusted him, all had been fooled. The elaborate world he had built crumbled into dust. The trick was finally over. The past came rushing back to meet him. The authorities in California were very interested in his arrest. They remembered the unsolved case of John and Linda Sohus, the couple who had vanished from San Marino in 1985, the couple whose guest house had been rented by a man named Christopher Crow, a man who was now identified as Christian Gerhartsreiter. In 1994, a construction crew digging a swimming pool in the backyard of the Sohus home had found human remains. The bones were identified as those of John Sohus. The case was no longer a missing persons investigation. It was a murder investigation. First, he had to face justice for the kidnapping. In 2009, a Boston jury found him guilty. He was sentenced to 4 to 5 years in prison. But his legal troubles were far from over. As soon as he finished his sentence in Massachusetts, he was sent to California. He was put on trial for the murder of John Sohus. The lawyers for the prosecution laid out the case against him based on clues, the lies, the stolen truck, his sudden disappearance after the couple went missing. Gerhartsreiter maintained he was innocent. He was calm and arrogant on the stand, a final performance for the jury. In 2013, the jury gave its decision. Guilty. Christian Gerhartsreiter, the fake Rockefeller, the English lord, the Hollywood producer, was found guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to 27 years to life in prison. The long, strange journey that began in a small Bavarian village had ended in a California prison cell. The boy who dreamed of becoming someone else had succeeded beyond his wildest dreams, but in the end, he could not escape the truth. He could not escape the consequences of his actions. The final curtain had fallen on one of the most remarkable fakes the world has ever seen.